Subhanallah. One of the mainstream scholars, contemporary maraja of today, Ayatollah Sheikh Makarim, he says, and this is on his website, he says, I don't know why ignorant attacks are launched at this incredible masterpiece of devotion, meaning Dua Nudba, whether it be against its chain or its content, both of which are flawless. End quote. But before we even address those things, I need to ask again, with all due respect, what is your criteria for authentication? I mean, seriously, do you even have a consistent set of rules, or do you make your own rules as you rampage your way through authentic Shia literature? I'm genuinely asking because first you say the dua is full of negativity and complaint, and we've addressed that in the previous question, but then you jump to saying it's accurate but not authentic, going as far as to say we know it didn't come from the Imams, which is not only an absurd statement, as you most certainly do not meet the incontrovertible burden of proof for that clear-cut verdict to say for a fact it didn't come from the Imams, but also an actual scholar with sufficient piety would hold a reserved and cautious opinion instead of jumping to their biased foregone conclusions. So I'm honestly perplexed as to how to even address this erratic line of reasoning. I never thought I'd see someone hold such a grudge against a prayer, and such a beautiful and inspirational prayer at that. Now, I won't even address the authenticity question because qualified scholars, those who are much more learned than I, as well as jurists, have attested to that. And it would be harfatul ajiz to even engage in that with these kinds of people. But let me address the other problems that were raised, right? He says that the dua creates two problems, even though he then rounds up to 3 points. But besides that, he mentions a few issues with the dua. The first, he says, it creates a negative outlook to humanity. The second was, I think it rids us of our confidence in our capability. And the third point, which is the most confusing, is he says it makes us imam-centric. Then he concludes, these are all in sharp contradiction to our human condition. So I'm like, what is the human condition? So let's actually look it up on Wikipedia here to know what that even means, right? Human condition. So this is on Wikipedia. It says the human condition is all of the characteristics and key events that compose the essentials of human existence, including birth, growth, emotion, aspiration, conflict, and mortality. This is a very broad topic which has been and continues to be pondered and analyzed from many perspectives, including those of religion, philosophy, history, art, literature, anthropology, psychology, and biology. As a literary term, the human condition is typically used in the context of ambiguous subjects, such as the meaning of life or moral concerns. I mean, what is that even? Honestly, what are you trying to say? These are in sharp contradiction to the human condition? Who knew that masadir al-tashri' besides al-Quran, al-Sunnah, al-Aql, al-Ijma' should also include wal-human condition? I mean, the oddity and the absurdity of that aside, let's see if these three statements that he makes hold any truth at all. Excuse me. The first one was, it provides a negative outlook for humanity. And when I hear that, I mean, it sounds like you've never actually read Dua Nudba, or Shia literature is so foreign to you that you don't know what you're talking about. Because while the dua addresses the injustices that have occurred in the past and present, an entire section literally paints the most exquisite picture of the future of humanity. Listen to what the dua actually says. The Imam says, مَتَى نُغَادِيكَ وَنُرَاوِحُكَ فَنُقِرَّ عَيْنًا. When will we be able to come to you and visit you and our eyes are illuminated? متى ترانا ونراك. When will we be able to see you and you us. وقد نشرت لواء النصر, and you have raised the flag of victory. ترى أترانا نحف بك وأنت تؤم الملأ وقد ملأت الأرض عدلا وأذقت أعداءك هوانا وعقابا وأبرت العتاة وجحدة الحق وقطعت دابر المتكبرين واجتثثت أصول الظالمين ونحن نقول الحمد لله رب العالمين. When will the day come when you have restored justice to the world, you have destroyed the evildoers, and you have given victory to those who are righteous, so that we could say Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, praise be to Allah. I mean, how beautiful can it be? The dua then goes on to say أين المعد لقطع دابر الظلمة أين المنتظر لإقامة الأمت والعوج أين المرتجى لإزالة الجور والعدوان أين المدخر لتجديد الفرائض والسنن. Where is the one who's going to restore justice? Where is the one who's going to destroy injustice and oppression? Where is the one who will do all these things? أين المتخير لإعادة الملة والشريعة, the one who will restore this religion. المؤمل لإحياء الكتاب وحدوده, revive the Quran. أين محيي معالم الدين وأهله أين قاصم شوكة المعتدين. Where is the one who is going to deal a final blow to the aggressors, destroy the buildings of hypocrisy, أبنية الشرك والنفاق. أين مبيد أهل الفسوق والعصيان والطغيان أين حاصد فروع الغي والشقاق, and so on and so forth. All of these sections are in this beautiful dua and nudbah. However, you have some guy who feels that this is too bleak and too negative, and then says that because of this dua is not authentic. I mean, honestly, if you feel that way, then maybe you should reevaluate which camp you're in. Because if you're in God's camp, you'd rejoice at the prospect that falsehood will be defeated and eradicated once and for all. You'd only see that as a negative if you're playing for the other team. Unless there's another problem, and we kind of talked about this in the previous question, right? Maybe you don't even believe in the Mahdi. Perhaps you hold that Sufi view that the Mahdi is some vague concept of humans evolving into demigods, which is a comical notion extracted straight from Japanese anime as well as Rumi mystical gibberish. So that's as far as the first point is concerned. As far as the second point, where he says it rids us of our confidence in our abilities and our capabilities, how does it do that exactly? Again, I think you don't understand how dua works or what dua even is. Since when does dua abrogate our responsibility? Who says that? Of course we must do what we can, but there comes a point when you know that direct divine intervention is required. Also, are you suggesting that you can conclusively end all injustice in the world today? I mean, I get that you're pretending to have this 60s woke hipster persona, and I admire your enthusiasm, I really do. But only someone super high on psychedelics would think that they can reverse the space-time continuum and undo the Saqifa. The dua speaks about the injustices committed against God's prophets and emissaries. Let's hear your plan, excuse me, on how you'll use your capabilities to restore justice for them and accomplish what God calls victory for His prophets in this world. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, إِنَّا لَنَنْصُرُ رُسُلَنَا وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَيَوْمَ يَقُومُ الْأَشْهَادِ. We shall grant victory to our prophets and the believers in this world, and on the day the dead will rise, on the day of judgment. Let's see how you plan to do that with your capabilities. Actually, forget universal justice. How about you use those capabilities of yours to address one single problem, like, let's say, women's sexual exploitation, or the 40 to 50 million abortions that take place every year, or maybe address growing wealth disparity between the rich and poor, which is only getting bigger and bigger. address these systemic problems, not on a global scale, but on a local scale. I'll wait. In fact, seems we can either wait for your grand plan that's based on your capabilities, or use the inspiration of Dua Nudba to actively prepare for the one with divine backing. أين المنتظر لإقامة الأمت والعوج. And as far as the third point, which is that Dua Nudba makes us Imam-centric, right? There it is, brothers and sisters. The anti-Shia rhetoric is finally coming out, right? Which is why I said in the previous question that there is a silver lining in all of this. All these hidden things need to come out so that we can tell the righteous from the hypocrite. Because you see a pattern emerging here. He uses these vague and ambiguous terms to scare lay people into thinking that they're somehow committing shirk. It's a classic Wahhabi-esque move, repackaged as Shia scholarship. Excuse me. The entirety, honestly, if you look at Dua Nudba, the entirety of the dua is about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His messengers and His prophets and obedience to God. It begins with this. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد نبيه وآله وسلم تسليما اللهم لك الحمد على ما جرى به قضاؤك في أوليائك. O Allah, praise be to you for your decree that you have made for your followers, for your friends, your awliya. That's how the dua begins. And then the dua ends with this statement. وَأَقْبِلْ إِلَيْنَا بِوَجْهِكَ الْكَرِيمِ وَأَقْبَلْ تَقَرُّبَنَا إِلَيْكَ. O Allah, turn to us with your generous face and accept our us seeking nearness to you. وَانظُرْ إِلَيْنَا نَظْرَةَ الرَّحِيمَةِ. Look at us with your mercy. نَسْتَكْمِلُ بِهَا الْكَرَامَةَ عِنْدَكَ. What is this boogeyman that they've made up? Imam centricity. Honestly, I don't understand. That's what Dua Nudba is like. But in order to scare people away from Imam al-Zaman, to scare people away from Shia literature, they've created this scarecrow called Imam centricity. Look at the Quran. I just want to give you a few examples from the Holy Quran to illustrate just how problematic their approach is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَن يُطِعِ الرَّسُولِ فَقَدْ أَطَاعَ اللَّهِ. This is in Surah An-Nisa. Whoever obeys the Prophet has obeyed Allah, has obeyed God. That's one verse. The second verse is وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَّسُولٍ إِلَّا لِيُطَاعَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. We have not sent a messenger except to be obeyed by the command of God. وَلَوْ أَنَّهُمْ إِذْ ظَلَمُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ جَاءُوكَ. And if they commit injustice against themselves, meaning they commit sins, come to you, O Prophet of Allah. جَاءُوكَ فَاسْتَغْفَرُوا اللَّهِ وَاسْتَغْفَرَ لَهُمُ الرَّسُولُ. And they seek forgiveness from God, and the Prophet seeks forgiveness for them. لَوَجَدُوا اللَّهَ تَوَّابًا رَحِيمًا. They will find Allah, they will surely find Allah to be repentant upon them and merciful. This is in Surah An-Nisa. That's the second verse. The third verse, فَلَا وَرَبِّكَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. But by your Lord they will not be believers حَتَّى يُحَكِّمُوكَ فِيمَا شَجَرَ بَيْنَهُم. Until they make you a judge between them in matters of when they disagree, when they have any discord. They have to make you the arbiter. You must be the judge. You must be that ultimate distinguisher between right and wrong. ثُمَّ لَا يَجِدُوا فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَرَجًا مِمَّا قَضَيْتَ وَيُسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا. They must submit fully to you, or else they won't be believers. If you look at all these verses, it appears as the Quran itself is making us Imam-centric, which is terrible because that makes the Quran contradictory to the human condition, as he put it. But in all seriousness, this is how these imposters deceive people and attack the Shia faith. God centricity, Quran centricity. I mean, these are all code words for their real agenda, which is to replace our culture that's rooted in the Thaqalain, in the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, and restore that with a confused neo-Salafi hodgepodge of secular liberal rationalism that's mixed with esoteric mystical revisionism. But the end game is to attack tashayyu'. Their unspoken motto is Hasbuna Kitabullah. And just like the original inventor of this statement, they're nothing but illiterates, as Ayatollah Makarim said. Wallahi, brothers and sisters, there is such a gaping lack of actual scholarship. When you hear statements like this, you realize just how deprived we are. This is exactly why we've introduced the program that we were talking about earlier, the John the Martyr Academy. Because you'd think there's a lot of scholars out there, but the reality is when it comes to authentic knowledge, it's a cold, dark world out there. What is this nonsense? Honestly, I mean, I can't believe that every marja advocates for reciting these beautiful du'as, yet instead of showcasing them to the world as masterpieces in spirituality and devotion, I'd have to sit here and defend them against attacks by people who know nothing. It's like having to defend the Mona Lisa from attacks leveled by a fool who says, she looks so depressed, the colors feel like they contradict the human condition. Why are you so art-centric? Her eyes are so emasculating. Honestly, it's so pathetic, and frankly, it's exhausting to having to debate these pseudo-intellectuals and, you know, imposter scholars. By the way, I mean, I think, you know, we have to talk about this a little bit. On the question of authenticity, let me share this example with you to kind of illustrate what I'm trying to say. Imagine you're invited for iftar at a friend's house. She comes, she cooks the food, she sets the table and brings the food. Everyone sits down to eat. Then all of a sudden, somebody storms off, screaming, "Oh my God, this table is full of germs and microparticles." Or something along the lines of, "It's against the human condition to eat here," or "The food itself has harmful microbes." So you try to calm that person down and say, you know, what's going on? And he says, "I saw this documentary on how biopharmaceutical and medical equipment are made, and this table fails to meet the level of sterilization that they use in those factories. There is dust, there's airborne organisms and vaporized particles. It's dirty. I can't eat here." If that ever happened to you, you tell this person to take their pills or to go see their doctor immediately. Why? Because it's a logical fallacy. The standard of hygiene, listen carefully to this, the standard of hygiene for biopharmaceutical and semiconductor manufacturing is one thing, while the standard for food consumption is another. You're confusing two different things. It's one thing to require a high standard and a direct connected chain for a hadith about halal and haram, but to require that for a supplication shows just how ignorant you are, and it shows you really know nothing about authentication. Because applying Sayyid al-Khoui's strict Rijali principles on everything is foolish, not least because those principles are today disputed and don't represent the latest mainstream trends in Hawza scholarship, being in Qom or in Najaf. And speaking of Rijali principles, do you consider yourself a follower of Sayyid al-Khoui, or are you a mujtahid and have your own principles? If you follow Sayyid al-Khoui's principles, then care to elaborate what those principles actually are? Because you're not a mujtahid. And to borrow your own quote, we know that you're not a mujtahid. If you're an adherent of Sayyid al-Khoui's, then adhere to his application of those principles. You can't cherry pick from this and that to patch up your inconsistent and incoherent theory. That's the problem with someone simply trying to throw around big names as an appeal to authority and intimidate poor, unsuspecting souls who don't know any better. Ask any qualified scholar like our esteemed Maraja, and they'll tell you that for a du'a nudba is more than reliable. And once again, on the question of authenticity, I think we have to establish that we're dealing with an individual who's not a scholar worthy of debate, but someone with nefarious intentions and an agenda to gut the Shia faith. And that's key. What he's saying does not represent tashayyu'. You want to establish your own religion? Go right ahead and do that. You want to become a liberal Sunni? Do that. No one's going to object to it. There's been many people like you, right? Several recent fake maraja did exactly that. One of them fled to Saudi Arabia and started wearing the shmagh, as they call it, threw away the turban, and the other one ran to some undisclosed location. You want to join that club? Feel free, be my guest. But people need to know that you do not represent the Shia faith. And that's all I'm going to say about this.